morning, everyone. Welcome back to Sun Up on 7. It's time to have our first guest on a very interesting conversation as we talk about the environmental protection regulation that has been implemented and is currently in the process of phasing out single-use plastic in the country. It's a movement that has been acclaimed globally. I've seen various posts where people are saying Belize has finally banned single-use plastic, which is really good as we talk about environmental protection, moving towards addressing climate change, and to talk about what's happening in that area and that's how it's affecting Belizeans. We have Mr. Anthony Mai, who's a senior environmental officer at the Ministry of Sustainable Development. Mr. Mai is joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Mr. Mai. How are you doing?
Morning, sir. I'm good. I'm doing pretty good, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for joining us and to have this very good conversation. Something that I believe Belizeans are quite aware. Maybe some are not, but let's bring it to light here on Sun Up on 7. Ren,
Sure.
let's get started.
Yeah, so let's get started. Mr. Mike, tell us a little bit about the process because I know there's several stages. We're in now the last stage. So I know March 31st is when it's like exit out. That is not it anymore. You cannot have single-use plastic. However, how was the stages rolled out? Because I read that, at first we had to be able to go back to the drawing board and give them more sufficient time and all these things. So can you tell us a little bit about the processes of the stage that got us to this point now?
Yeah, and while you answer that, Mr. Mike, can you just elaborate into what this regulation is about?
Perfect. Sure, I can do that. Again, thanks. So again, just based from the initial question, it looked like we are jumping directly into it and getting into the thick of it. But it's good. Let me just go back a bit, however, and explain briefly how important this legislation is and what the legislation hopes to accomplish. And then I will definitely respond to your question, Ms. Renata. So again, if you think about plastics, plastic is a synthetic product that has been around since the 1950s, right? Early 1950s. Since that time, it is estimated that about 8.3 billion tons of plastic has been produced globally. That is equivalent to the weight of the entire human population on Earth currently. Wow. So it shows you the magnitude of the problem, right?
Yes.
Wow, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is also estimated that daily, about 8 million tons of garbage ends up in the oceans, right? So again, it just shows you the magnitude of the problem. So again, globally, our countries recognize plastic as a major source of pollution. And so as you have been seeing, countries have been putting things together, legislation together to deal with plastics at the national level. And so in Belize, even though we are a small country and we don't produce a lot of plastics, because we do produce plastics, again, we have our part to play in this global effort to combat plastic pollution.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and so in around early 2015, the initiative started in Belize, where through the Department of Environment, several activities has been done to, bring us to where we are today with regards to the regulations. One of the first things is obviously we recognize that globally, the environmental movement was moving towards dealing with plastic pollution. Internally, we started by putting together a situational analysis of what is going on in Belize as it relates to plastics. We look at the different products that are being imported and the volume of those products that are being imported. And we look at where these products are going, in terms of the chain, the consumer chain. Mm-hmm. We also conducted a scientific study on microplastics, because again, I always tell people that when you throw a plastic bag or a styrofoam clamshell on the ground, maybe you throw it there today, but in a week when you pass, you don't see it and you might say, well, there's no issue. But then that product actually breaks down into microplastics. And microplastic is a serious issue right now, right? And it's not visible, it's there, and it's difficult, almost impossible to clean up, right? Because it's micro, it's very small. And what microplastic does is basically it gets consumed by, within the food chain, and basically it comes back to us. And so if you look at, right now studies are being done or have been done in Belize with, to try to identify the amount of microplastics within some of the biota, some of the seafoods and other products that people consume. And so there's this saying that whatever you throw into the environment comes back at you. So you throw bad chemicals into the environment, it comes back to you. Yep. If you throw plastics into the environment, it comes back to you into your food, through your food. So again, I'm just painting this picture of the real issue with regards to plastic.
Right.
And so we had all the information that we needed. Well, we had good information to really plan the way forward. We put together a task force which comprised of key sectors within the economy. We had the environmental group. We have people representing the private sector. etc. We have the civil society group all in around one table to discuss the plastics initiative. The recommendation from this group was that yes, we need to do something with regards to plastic, and they recommended that we do a phase-out approach. And so the Department of Environment wrote to Cabinet to request endorsement for us to put this policy in place. And so we did so. Cabinet approved it in early 2015, I think.
Okay.
And ever since then, we've been working to put the legislation together. Again, the committee looked at, the task force looked at, all the different angles of it, and they decided that the phase-out approach is the best approach.
Okay.
And so the legislation was prepared. It was passed in early January, I think January 15, 2020. And it had an initial phase-out date of, let me tell you what the initial phase-out date is. The initial phase-out date was for importation, because what the legislation did is it classified plastics into prohibited items and
Okay.
restricted items. So prohibited items are the single-use plastic bags, the styrofoam clamshell, the cups, the forks, the plates, etc., etc. And then they have restricted products, and these are products that are allowed to come into the country to be used mostly within, well, plastic is ubiquitous, it's all around. But a lot of the restricted products that are entering into the country is used within the productive sector, right? And so the initial phase-out dates was for importation. The law was passed January 14, 2020. The initial date for phase-out of importation was April 15, 2020, so that date has come. And since that date, we have phased out importation of plastics, the prohibited items. And so the law also looked at manufacturing, sale, and possession.
Okay.
And for manufacturing, the initial phase-out date was July the 15th, 2020. For sale, it was October the 15th, 2020. And for possession, it was January 15th, 2020. So while we met the date with regards to importation, which was April the 15th, 2020, we haven't changed that date. And so while the phase-out date for the manufacturing, sale, and possession was going on, again, because we stay in contact with our major stakeholders, and they have been saying that, at least for the manufacturers, that they have been having serious challenges to transition from producing plastic products to biodegradable products. Because again, it's not a switch where you just switch one,
All right.
just do one thing and then you could begin to produce biodegradable products. So they had asked for more time for them to really understand the system and look at what they could do to transition into making these biodegradable
right.
products.
So, Mr.
We
Mike,
would-
in
Sorry,
that
go ahead.
in that negotiation that you've been doing with your stakeholders, what have been some of the challenges identified with implementing this new regulation?
Yeah. So again, obviously, the fact that the initial phase-out date was a bit too short was a challenge, right? And so the manufacturers said we need more time, because again, it's a technical exercise that they need to do to be able to produce this thing. They do the biodegradable products. They said that the issue with temperatures, the internal temperature and external temperature that needs to be adjusted is it needs to be researched, and it needs a period of time before they could get the right equation.
Yep.
And so we wrote back to Cabinet, and that is just one of the challenges. There are some more challenges that I'll get to shortly. But we wrote back to Cabinet and asked for a pushback, an amendment to the law to push back the phase-out date even further. And Cabinet approved that the dates be pushed back from manufacturing to January 15, 2021, the sale April 15, 2021, and the possession July 14, 2021. And even with that additional grace period, the challenges were still there. And so they had our stakeholders came back to us and they asked for additional time. So we thought about it and we wrote back to Cabinet, and so Cabinet has approved the new phase-out date that you guys are seeing now, which are basically, I think the end of February. So the end of January was the phase-out date for manufacturing. The end of February this year, there is the phase-out date for
the sale.
For sale,
Yeah.
and then possession is the ending of March.
Yes.
So that is where we are. One of the challenges, since you had asked about challenges, that
Yeah, so you're mentioning the manufacturers. I'm thinking, what have some of the challenges experienced with the population, with the consumers? I think that is like quite the big shift that we need to like phase, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because everybody loves the convenience of having a plastic.
yeah, plastic plastic is really, from an industrial standpoint, it's a very good product because it is cheap, it is durable, and it is easy to make, right?
Right.
So now the issue with regards to consumers, remember, consumer is at the base of the consumer chain, and so you have importation is where you could control a lot of things, right? But between the importer and the consumer, again, a product would pass through several hands. So you have the retailers, etc., right, and the distributors, etc. And so Unfortunately, one of the first challenge that we were notified of is the increased cost of biodegradable products,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
Which is understandable. I mean, if a product takes a bit more to produce, then obviously it will take a bit more to sell, and so it will have an increased cost. At least from an environmental standpoint at the Department of Environment, we understand that, but again, our response to that is that, again, environmental protection and really, looking at the possible environmental consequences that plastic has. The increased cost is kind of negligible considering the big picture, right?
Yes.
But even so, yeah, again, we all notice that the price is driven by the market. And so
Right.
you have kind of supply and demand, you have competition, and the market always finds a way to regulate the price, and so price always comes down based on the market system. And so we believe that eventually the price for these biodegradable products will come down based on competition, et cetera, et cetera. Right?
Definitely.
So price was the first challenge. The other challenge that we have, and this is a challenge that we had with the importers, the way the lab was set up, it was set up in such a way that the restricted products include biodegradable products. But the challenge was if an importer is to bring in a biodegradable product, how would the Department of Environment know, one, that the product is really biodegradable as compared to
Right.
other products?
Exactly.
And so the law required that a national biodegradable standard be prepared, and the national agency within Belize that deals with standards is the Bureau of Standards.
Right.
So Bureau of Standards put together a committee, and the committee looked at developing the standards, etc., the national standard for Belize, and that has a process. And the reason why we had extended or asked for the next amendment to push back the phase out date was to give enough time for the committee to really put together a practical, implementable biodegradable standards. And so the biodegradable standard was passed, I think, around August in 2021.
Okay.
Yep, last year. And so now, whenever a restricted product comes into the country, the importer has to provide several reports and laboratory tests
Okay.
so that the Bureau of Standard could look at that to determine if the product is biodegradable. And if it is, the Department of Environment registers it as a biodegradable product. It is given a unique identification number, and then anyone then could bring in that product because it has already been tested by the Bureau of Standards. It has already been approved by them in a way.
Okay. So basically, you're saying that these biodegradable products that we're putting out there are indeed biodegradable.
Well, the ones that has been registered for the DOE, and it is registered based on the recommendation and approval from the Bureau of Standards. So the Bureau of Standards has the technical expertise to determine if these products are biodegradable or not.
All right. Thank you. What is the Ministry of Sustainable Development, or in particular this department dealing with this regulation, doing when it comes to behavior change? Because again, we're talking about importers and the chain of demand. But I'm thinking if consumers are not demanding plastics, then obviously there's no need to be manufacturing and importing different things. So how are we targeting our Belizean society with this behavior change?
Yeah. Good. So behavior change is a core to implementing any new policy within government, right? Eventually, that is what you'd want. You want the people to see the importance of it and understand why it is that the behavior needs to be changed. So again, with everything that we do, we always ensure that we do it with this in mind. The way, in our experience, the way you receive or you promote behavioral change is through several things. First and foremost, you need to educate the population,
Right.
And so we have done so to a certain degree. We have done several public awareness and environmental education campaigns on plastics alone. We have been doing it since 2015, and we will continue to do it. So education is very important. Secondly, you need to have some type of policy or regulation in place to drive this change, right? And so, for example, the Department of Environment, we can say, okay, we want to transition into biodegradable and just say it word of mouth. We have to have legislation to support the actions that we want to do. And then thirdly, and this is where the gap is at the moment, is you need to provide incentives
Right.
so that people want to change, right? And so far we have done good with regards to educating, sensitizing the entire stakeholder group, right? We have laws in place to kind of guide the process, and the law also has punitive measures for not abiding by the conditions. So it's kind of like the carrot and stick approach. So we have a law to kind of lash you if you don't do it. But what we don't have right now, and well, I don't want to say we don't have, let me rephrase that. What we need to improve on is providing the carrot so that it basically drives the behavioral change. And so we have been discussing internally and with the Ministry of Sustainable Development, which is our ministry, that this is will be, at least for the short term, this will be the focus for the plastics initiative. We really need to look at the entire stakeholder group, look at the various initiatives that we may be able to provide, and put that in place so that then, we could get them to move towards wanting to do it rather than we telling them you have to do it. If I could put it like that. Yeah.
Right.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the carrot here, and and you mentioned one of the key things is that plastics end up in our system through microplastics. And if
Yeah.
you think about that, if you think about the impact that microplastics have in our body, is that it's carcinogen. So it can contribute or it can lead to cancer
Yep.
in people. But I'm also
Yeah.
thinking, looking at plastics in the sea, looking at plastics in the environment, it does not look appealing.
No, it
right?
doesn't.
So
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna enjoy nature and it's everything that comes with it, how do you feel about seeing plastics there?
What I want to ask is
Yeah.
in regards to the durability, because I know I've had some friends that have complained a little bit about, like, for example, the straws. When they get their drinks and we're now phasing out the single-use plastic and everything, some of them said that their straws that they've been getting, like, they prefer for just, like, not having a straw in it at
Yeah,
all
I don't
because
ask for straws.
sometimes, like, the ones that they're getting is just, like, kind of just the unfold with the liquid that they're drinking from or so forth. When it comes to the products that people are now being able to import in instead of the single-use plastic, is there anything that, there's certain quality levels and checks that are put in place, or you just whatever you can afford, you basically import that and that's what you're going to be using? Once it's not single-use plastic, is that something that's happening?
Good. So let me just, I want to say something in relation to the comment that Mr. Mendez just
Uh-huh.
mentioned. So, and I'll get to you shortly, Ms. Renata, if I could. So, Mr. Mendez mentioned something very important that I wouldn't want to be missed. He mentioned that obviously plastic is unsightly and the various impacts related to plastics, it is carcinogenic, etc. And so I was just thinking, when he said that, I was thinking, well, that's a very good way to explain why probably the increased cost of, you're spending an extra shilling
Right.
for getting a biodegradable product. Maybe that cost is something that we could incur. Considering all of these things that plastic do, it might not be a real cost per se. You understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to look at the claim that the product is a bit more expensive, but it does have benefits to the environment and to our own human health. So I just wanted to touch on that. Didn't want to lose that train of thought. But so yeah, with regards to Ms. Renata, in terms of quality assurance and quality control, that is with the Bureau of Standards. But I will say this, that yes, indeed, the biodegradable products. Okay, so when the task force was set up to look at how we will implement the phase out of single-use plastic, the private sector was represented, and the private sector. Basically, the reason why the private sector was there is because the private sector uses a lot of plastic and styrofoam products. And so one of the things that we didn't want the law to do was to negatively impact the productive sector of the country, right? So that was not the intent of the law. And so if you look at the legislation kind of classified the plastics and styrofoam products that is used within the productive sector as barrier plastics.
Yeah.
So barrier plastic means that the type of products that the productive sector needs in order for them to continue to strive and to do their work.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example. The meat production companies in Belize, they normally have the meat displayed on these styrofoam plates and they put a plastic wrap around it, right?
Yeah.
So when when we were discussing what all would we prohibit from coming into the country,
Yeah.
the private sector said, well, there is no alternative, biodegradable alternative that is durable, that is of the quality to these styrofoam products. If we use any biodegradable product, our product will not look appealing, it will lose attraction, etc., etc. So that's the reason why the law still allows some of these styrofoam and plastic products to come into the country, because the quality of these products are better for now, right? For now. And again, we need to work along with the private sector. If we were to include every single plastic product and styrofoam product within the legislation, the entire initiative would be, would not move forward. It would be
Yeah.
halted, and we wouldn't be able to achieve anything. And so we need to look at it practically. We need to look at it seriously, nationally. And so we determined that only these products should be prohibited for now.
Yeah.
As soon as and again, so biodegradable, especially in Belize, the manufacturing of biodegradable product is just starting. And so you would imagine that in the next 5, 10 years, the biodegradable products themselves would be, the quality and standard that it needs to be. But everything is a step. It's a move forward. And so there's this
Very
saying,
true.
don't let perfection be an enemy of the good. So we have a good thing in place, right? So
Definitely.
let's implement it. And
Yeah.
we look at all the issues, the concern, the challenges, and we solve these issues and we make the product better in the future.
Yeah,
Most
and
definitely.
it's totally doable if you look at it. Because if I reflect on my growing, 15 years ago, we used to go to the store and we used to take out one shopping bag where you used to put all your groceries. If you used to take your containers to get like oil, you used to get like vinegar. So there's different things that you used to take your container to do. I am seeing now friends that are, even if they go and get tacos, they take their container for them to get their tacos in it. If you're gonna get, like $2 tacos, rather than getting a plastic bag and foil paper and napkin, just get your foil paper and your napkin. You don't need a bag. So it's like, it's a doable behavior change that we can do, but it's just,
It is, yeah.
right, what are the things that we can implement? So find something within your space.
It's all
Yeah.
about like it makes sense to do phase out because I think change is sometimes very uncomfortable for everyone. And so
Yeah.
with that regards, you have to be able to do it in different phases. Like you mentioned just now when it comes to the meats, and so you have the whole idea that, it's not there yet to be able to have when it comes to the meat part. However, we do know that, for the normal basic, cups and plates and straws and all these things, we can do that. So it's definitely, you could see in 5 to 10 years, the difference that we'll be able to upgrade to our next level. But we're
Yeah.
phasing out slowly, and that's going to allow people to slowly adapt into that mindset that this is here to stay. This is a new way that we have to do it
Yeah.
because of climate change and just the fact of taking care and preserving our environment. So I just want to thank you so much, Mr. Mai, for being here, for explaining all of it about the importance, giving those big numbers so people can be aware of the seriousness that we have to be taking ourselves and, of course, our environment, and holding our private sector accountable as well and doing our part. If you don't have to get a plastic bag, if you don't need a straw, if you can bring your own container, if you can bring your own little bag to the market, do these things. The business sector to cut back also on their use of whatever it is that they're using. Even the biodegradable ones, you can be able to say, you know what, I'll bring my own bag. It's fine. You don't have to give me anything.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
definitely something that we must be taking on for ourselves too as well. But again, thank you so much, Mr. Mai, for being here and sharing all this great information. With that, we go to our next commercial break.
Sure, thank you.
Up next, we have the real estate industry of Belize. And so we're going to be talking about the new association. So stay tuned for that exciting conversation. We'll be right back.